Honourable Member for Castries South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by joining other parliamentarians in congratulating you in becoming the Speaker of this body. I think according to protocol, you've actually been demoted. But we all know that it is the lower house that really matters in the Parliament of St. Lucia. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am once again pleased to address this debate as the duly elected parliamentary representative for Castries South. As usual, I give praise to the Almighty, my family, friends, my executive group, and supporters. Last year was a truly hard year for my constituents, and if ever a statement you pay rung true, it has been since June 6, 2016. There is wanton fear in this country that the soul of our country is being lost, that the identity of this country is being eroded, and that the moral fabric of this country has been torn apart. But the constituents of Castries South are resilient. They know struggle and survival. They will persevere, and I will be there with them. Mr. Speaker, I continue to be immensely grateful for the support given to me from the constituents of Castries South. They remind me every day that they expect the highest level of representation from me, that they want a different politics. They want a politics of hope, of aspiration, and of decency and decorum. So I affirm that I will continue to confidently and purposefully represent my constituency. I will always strive with all the ability I have to hold the government to account, not through insinuations, but through examination of the facts and asking the hard questions. So, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I address this Honourable House on the estimates of expenditure and revenue for financial year 2018 to 2019, and to focus on 4 questions. What is the social and political context within which this budget is being presented? Are there any benefits for Castries South? What does the estimates tell us about the priorities of the government? And finally, does it pass the test for fiscal responsibility? So, Mr. Speaker, the social and political context. Last year in my first budget presentation, I stated that I know that I'm a marked man. It was obvious during the election campaign, one which was vicious and malicious to no end. But my strength and resoluteness was and continues to be firm. This government has continued to be unrelenting in its divisiveness, vindictiveness, and abuse of power. It started with the firing of all the nice workers, rehiring home care workers of their own personal choosing, and refusing to pay CDP contractors up to this day. When business places are raided in bandolero style for legitimately housing government supplies, this is an abuse of power. It has worsened with the termination of contracts of professionals who head statutory bodies, not political appointees, but professionals, St. Lucian professionals, individuals known as always placing St. Lucia first. Their only crime was being appointed under the SLP. And even when these individuals are recommended for regional jobs, every attempt is made to block them. Now, public servants are afraid to speak to members of the opposition because there is a fear that they will be victimized. At the constituency level, opposition parliamentarians have been starved of any support simply to make them and their supporters pay for electing SLP parliamentarians.
Right.
The role of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, is to hold the government to account, to ask the difficult questions, to seek explanations, and to ensure that our Constitution and our laws are not violated. Prime ministers, government ministers, and government officials should never use the institutions of the state to pursue narrow, selfish political objectives. So I'm warning the government ministers and public servants who are involved. You have opened the door of no return. Do not walk through it. And I'm waiting for your next move. I want to say to all, let us fight in the arena of ideas. Let us debate in the chambers of parliament. And let us battle on the public platforms. But once a government has become so insecure in its standing, so vindictive towards opposition, and so indifferent to the laws of the land, then no citizen is safe. You are making St. Lucia a bitter place to live. So, Mr. Speaker, I move on. Are there any benefits in these estimates to Castries South? As was for last year, there is nothing specifically mentioned in the estimates for Castries South. I searched every page of the estimates, over 500 pages, for a mention of a community in Castries South. There was one. It was on page 486. The capital expenditure of the Department of Infrastructure states that a sum of $655,436 for the resurfacing of the Cicero Main Road, a project which was completed in early 2016 and for which another payment must be made. I look for any allocation for the rehabilitation of roads in Goodlands, the rehabilitation of the Basses Joseph Main Road, the rehabilitation of the Marigold Main Road, and the rehabilitation of roads in Monkey Tongue, and there was none. In this vein, I wish to appeal to the Minister of Infrastructure to consider my request for these roads as urgent. I have met with his ministry. I have expressed to them my priorities for Castries South, and I hope, Mr. Speaker, we will get some relief in this year. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, the Marigold Main Road. This is a road that leads to one of the most picturesque places in St. Lucia. Marigold is a special place in our tourism product, and there's no reason why the Marigold Main Road that carries so many tourists to Marigold Bay must be in the state in which it is in. Madam Speaker, but it would not be fair if I did not say that the Minister of Infrastructure during the course of the year did do some work in Castries South. There was a potholing of the Basset Joseph Road, and there was work that was done on one of the roads in Goodlands and on the Cuba Railroad. So for in all the entire function of government, there's one ministry I can say that did something in Castries South. Madam Speaker, whilst I'm speaking about the Minister for Infrastructure, I would wish that the Minister explain to the people of St. Lucia the curious omission of significant programs for his department. We can refer to page 205 or page 485. 205 or 485. No longer is there any allocation for the reconstruction and rehabilitation of roads. No allocation for desilting of rivers and drains. No allocation for secondary and tertiary roads rehabilitation. No allocation for slope stabilization, sea defense and coastal management, and paving of streets and villages. These programs approximated $12.8 million, and they do not seem to be accounted for. I would wish that the Minister can explain where, in all the allocations, such programs will be catered for. Mr. Speaker, as I did last year, I look for any mention of a construction of a playing court for the youth of Fuasho. I explained in this Honorable House that the Fuasho community houses the emergency road to the Victoria Hospital. The young people in Fuasho play on that very same road, and every now and then need to clear so the ambulance with its sirens can pass. The last government actually identified a spot, obtained it. A court was designed, Mr. Speaker, but nothing has happened since. It's almost 2 years, Mr. Speaker. And I trust that the Minister for Sports will look away from the dawn and look to what's needed in our communities. Mr. Speaker, the resurfacing of the Sectoral playing field, another project that was already approved under the national lotteries and still has not started, Mr. Speaker. Do not make Castries South suffer more than what's necessary, Mr. Speaker. The completion of the Marigot playing field, it became so frustrating for the young people of Marigot, Roseau, Coulitong, Formangé, Bel-Air, that they decided to just start using the playing field even before it was completed and handed over, because it was taking so long for any work to be continued to complete it, Mr. Speaker. This is just totally acceptable. A field that was almost 95% completed was totally abandoned. And Mr. Speaker, the one that really hurts me, the Goodlands playing area. I came to this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, and I made an appeal to the members opposite. Do not put the trailers where the young people of Goodlands play their football and their cricket. They had cleared an area. That is where they played. The member for Castries have responded to me, y'all win power, why I build a proper playing field for them? That's where the young people recreated. And exactly what was said, please do not do, was done. All the trailers that were in Banans and other parts of Castries were taken and put exactly where the young people had cleared and where they play. There is an expanse of land available, but it was put exactly where they recreate. That cannot be right. That cannot be fair. And again, I appeal to find some other spot. There is enough land where those trailers can be moved to allow the young people possession for them to play their football and cricket. A few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, we heard another one of the now famous flashing lights presentation, this time from Don Lockerbie. And Mr. Speaker, the member for Dennery North will speak in detail on Don Lockerbie and his presentations. But in his presentation, he mentioned that he was going to build a national sports park in Cul-de-Sac. 2 cricket stadiums will be built there. In Cul-de-Sac. 2 cricket stadiums will be built there. Basketball courts, netball courts, swimming pools, a hotel, a sports academy, boutiques in Cul-de-Sac. As the Parliamentary for Castries South, I could never refuse such a gift. But, Mr. Speaker, no, well, I think he made the area where all the cows are that gets flooded, that expanse of land there. It couldn't be anywhere else. Not there? Well, I was under the impression it was that area of land. The Minister of Sports, when he speaks, can give us more detail about Don Lockerbie's plans. But if that area, which falls under Castries South, is where the National Sports Park will be built, I would not refuse it, Mr. Speaker. But I am not so sure, Mr. Speaker, that such is possible even in my lifetime, Mr. Speaker. But I'm making a general appeal, Mr. Speaker, that more attention be given to the state of young men in Castries South, and in particular the sports lovers. And the Minister is right next to me, and I've said it before and I will say it again. And I would like him, when he speaks, Mr. Speaker, to tell me where in the budget is the allocation for all the plans that Mr. Don Lockerbie announced. Because I think he announced by February next year there will be a new stadium in Soufrière with 400-meter running track and AstroTurf. On that point, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the Minister can, in a very educated way, speak about the consequences of AstroTurfs for sports, and especially in tropical climates like ours. But, Mr. Speaker, somebody else will speak on sports. The point was made by the member for Castries East that under the allocations for the Department of Sports, there were many programs that are now zero-rated. The purchase of sports equipment, and many others that are zero-rated. And I look forward to the explanation from the Minister. What has happened to those items, and how is it that young people will be receiving assistance with sports equipment? Federations will be receiving assistance with sports equipment, and where monies for coaching clinics and coaching programs will come from. So I look forward to the presentation of the Minister of Sports, the member for Dennery South. Mr. Speaker, once again, there's an allocation of $18.6 million for the Constituency Development Program. The Minister did explain last year on public television that less emphasis will be placed on infrastructure and more on training. I think we all know where that's headed, Mr. Speaker. But I really wish to appeal to the Minister that there are still huge deficiencies in the physical conditions faced by communities in Castries South. There's a crying need for footpaths, retaining walls, steps, and drains throughout, from Fuasho, the Old Cemetery, George Cooper Road, Banan, Tunnel Road, Cicero, Goodlands, Monlatok, Ticolo, Bassett Joseph Marigo. All over the constituency, there are demands for footpaths, for steps, for drains. And Mr. Speaker, it was interesting to hear the member for Castries Central outline the process that they have in Castries Central for CDP projects. As a member of this Honorable House and an elected parliamentarian, no one has ever informed me of the CDP program, how monies can be accessed, and what's available for Castries South. I've heard the member for Castries South say repeatedly the day somebody can tell him how much he personally got for CDP, he will give twice that. I'm not in the business of playing those games when the interest and the welfare of the constituents of Castries South are involved.
Welcome to opposition.
Well, I guess if you're saying that's how the politics should be and should remain, then fine. But you have an opportunity to change it. I had an opportunity to change it. The Prime Minister obviously has some new words anyway. Mr. Speaker, last year I made an appeal for greater attention to solid waste management in Castries South and in Cicero in particular. I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that after much distress and obvious public dissatisfaction, the Solid Waste Management Authority has acted and the situation has improved dramatically in Cicero. And I must say, I must applaud the Solid Waste Management Authority. So I use this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to call upon all the residents of Castries South to cooperate and let us ensure that we stick to the practices outlined and maintain a clean and healthy environment in Cicero and Castries South generally. I also noted, Mr. Speaker, last year there was an increase in the allocation for the Solid Waste Management Authority, an increase from $1.7 million to $2.58 million. However, in going through the estimates this year, I noticed that there are two allocations for Solid Waste Management Authority, two. On page 456, Mr. Speaker, and you may refer to it, there is an allocation under the Department of Infrastructure of $2.58 million. And on page 466, there is another allocation for St. Lucia's Solid Waste Management Authority of $7.17 million. So between two ministries, the Solid Waste Management Authority is getting almost $10 million, Mr. Speaker. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to the respective ministers providing an explanation for the double allocation to the Solid Waste Management Authority. Mr. Speaker, I note an allocation in this year's estimate of $9.1 million for the PROUD program. This time, Mr. Speaker, it is $4.6 million less. I am very supportive of the PROUD program. I remember its genesis, and I've always been a proud supporter of the view that every St. Lucian should strive to own a piece of this land, that our land should not be sold entirely to foreigners, and that every St. Lucian have a right to own a piece of this rock that we live on. And I'm appealing to the government to consider the Old Cemetery, consider Banan, Monlatok, and Goodlands when they are conceiving of the PROUD programs, because these communities have been affected with land ownership issues for decades. There are people living on lands for 50, 60, even 70 years. Mr. Speaker, and they have no title to those lands. And this is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. I'm rather displeased to note that the allocation for the aftercare program has declined from $500,000 to $340,000. And Mr. Speaker, you could find it on page 499. Mr. Speaker, the after-school care program is a very important program for communities like Fuasho and Sisera. It is critical. Some of those children, when they come from school, they need a place to go to enhance their skills, to be looked after until their parents can take over. It is important, Mr. Speaker. And in Sisera, there's a situation where in the community center, there is an entire musical equipment for a musical band. Stordong says, obtained by the previous government. There are about 20 computers in storeroom for the last 2 years. For the last 2 years, I'm sure those computers would have gotten bad by now. All of it for the aftercare, for after-school program. So you have equipment for musical band and computers not being used. Locked in a room downstairs, this Fuasho Community Center. And one would have expected in the budget to see an increase in the after-school care program because of its critical importance. Instead, we notice a decrease. And I'm sure when the Honorable Minister speaks, he'll probably explain why this year, rather than he getting an increase, there is a decrease in his allocation. I'm pleased to hear that the Youth Empowerment for Life project on page 493 has an allocation of $3.2 million. It was the same amount that was allocated last year. So last year, this project had $3.2 million. This year it has again another $3.2 million. And I would love to know, how was it implemented? And how did the young people of Castries South benefit from that program? It is a program I support, and in the budget last year, I expressed my support for this initiative. It is similar to a program that existed under the Labour Party, but it doesn't matter what the nomenclature is. The critical thing is young people will benefit from it, and I support it. But if $3.2 million was spent last year, I certainly would love to know, how did Castries South benefit from it? I noted again, Mr. Speaker, last year the allocation for the Basic Needs Trust Fund, BNTF 7 and 8, were $8.7 million and $2 million respectively. This year it declines again. Why the decline? This is a program that's important to Goodlands because there are a number of projects that have been approved under the BNTF for Goodlands. And I have seen no progress on those projects. And I want to appeal that we seek as much as possible to obtain as much as we can under the BNTF. I am told that the decline is for two primary reasons. That CDB itself is receiving less money to provide for grants, but the amount that the countries allocated is pegged to its implementation rate. And St. Lucia implementation rate has dropped dramatically. I would love to hear from the minister as to why the BNTF is declining and what are the implications for the projects in Goodlands, because the people of Goodlands still look forward to receiving the concrete roads that fall under this program. Now, Mr. Speaker, moving on from Castries South, what do the estimates tell us about the priorities of the government? Let us start by examining revenue. The member for Miku South and Minister of Finance boasts of revenue having improved over 2016. The member for Ancillary Canaries, in his usual style, was saying how the figures are glorious. The number of poor people in St. Lucia are declining rapidly, and that we should all be happy. And it is true in some ways, Mr. Speaker, that the figures did improve. There was an increase, Mr. Speaker, of 22.6 million over 2016 in this year's financial year. But, Mr. Speaker, the important point is the government underperformed. The government expected the amount to be collected to be $1.15 billion, and the government collected less than $48 million of what it expected. Let's put in context. The government had expected to collect a certain amount of revenue, and it fell far short. And how do you tell us to be happy because the figures are glorious? It's not, Mr. Speaker. But let us examine the areas of decline, Mr. Speaker. Let us examine non-tax revenue, capital revenue, and grants. Non-tax revenue fell short by almost $21 million. So let us examine what may have been the reason. Under non-tax revenue is the CIP fees. $43 million was expected to be collected. Instead, it is reported that $21 million was collected. Let's go over it again, Mr. Speaker. $43 million was expected to be collected under the CIP. The estimates reports that $21 million was collected. The HCS News carried the CEO of CIP saying that he said that for the financial year, and the member for Castries is and leader of the opposition made reference to it, 259 applications were approved for citizenships. 289, 259, but I'll work with 259. Now, each application can range from 100,000 US for a single applicant to 500,000 US for bonds. I will assume that all the applications were at the lowest end, 100,000 US. If we take each applicant to be a single donation of 100,000 US, that would bring in $25.9 million US dollars, which is 69 million EC dollars. 69 million EC dollars. If the CIP unit pays 10% commission to marketing agencies and 10% commission to agents, that should leave us with $55.3 million. How is it that the government is reporting that it only collected $21 million? Where is the balance? Approved. No, for you to be approved, you have to make your investment. For citizenship to be approved, you pass due diligence. When you pass due diligence, you are told you now make your investment, you deposit your 100,000 US, and you granted citizenship.
You are the expert on that. So.
Well, I know something about it. And when we debate the policy, I'll tell you some more about why St. Lucia is where it is now with the CIP, but we'll come to that. So where is the missing CIP money, Mr. Speaker? Where is it? Is it in an escrow account overseas for investors? And if it was disbursed as part of an investment deal, as much as I'm against that, then shouldn't it be somewhere in the estimates? Shouldn't it be? For the financial year coming, which we are debating now, it is estimated that $29 million will be collected. And I wish to remind the Prime Minister of the legal requirements, because that's really critical and important. Section 43 of the Citizenship by Investment Act provides that, 1, the St. Lucia National Economic Fund is established. 2, qualifying investments of cash shall be paid into the St. Lucia National Economic Fund, meaning that when monies are paid, they're supposed to go into the National Economic Fund. And 3, the Minister for Finance shall lay before Parliament every financial year for its approval the purposes to which the funds will be allocated. It means, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is supposed to come to this Parliament and to tell us this is the $43 million that I'm expecting to make or earn, and this is how it's going to be used, and we want parliamentary approval. That's what the law says. In this budget is provided for another $20-odd million to be collected. But there is no account anywhere of how those monies would be used. And I still want the minister to explain to us where is the balance of the money. I'm sure there is a legitimate reason, but the people of St. Lucia are supposed to know where the passport monies are going and what it is being used for. Mr. Speaker, the second decline was in capital revenue. It was estimated that $7.4 million would have been collected, but only $1.1 million was collected. Now, Mr. Speaker, I need you to help me. I have gone through this entire document, almost 600 pages, and there's no page that tells me about capital revenue. How much and what is it being collected, how it's been collected. There's no way in this document. And maybe I missed it. Maybe I did miss it, Mr. Speaker. So please, I would ask you to help me. Which page it is in this document that I will see a statement of capital revenue? And I tell you, I'm new in this house, it's only my second budget, but I would love somebody to explain to me where I can find the information on capital revenue. Well, you've threatened me many times before, so you can continue if you want. But I'll tell you something. Well, if you tell me I'm lucky I've been at it for a long time, what are you telling me? Mr. Speaker, the food item grants. Food item grants. Food item grants. The food item grants. In the estimates, Mr. Speaker, $87.4 million was estimated, Mr. Speaker, but only $55.4 million was received. $87.4 million was estimated, only $55.4 was received. This estimates that only 69.6 will be received, a significant decline. The question is, why such a huge decline in grants? And the political leader, member for Castries, raised some of the questions. Are our friends upset with us? Are our bilateral relationships under serious stress? Did the blacklist have any effects? And is this not a government that touted that friendly governments are their friends and not friends of the St. Lucia Labour Party? Why is our grant receipts declining so significantly? And why are we estimating for the financial year 2018-2019 even lower amounts of grant funding? Moving on, Mr. Speaker, the estimates and the revenue provides for a 50% decline in property tax on page 15, $6 million less. And we need to ask the question, the tax amnesty on property, who is it really benefiting? Is it benefiting the St. Lucian whose house is valued below $200,000? Who are the real people who will be giving up $6 million revenue to the state of St. Lucia? Who are these people? $6 million less will be collected from tax on property. Who are the people in St. Lucia that are benefiting from that amnesty?
The residents of Akiola measure their houses.
Mr. Speaker, the airport tax on page 15, and the member for Castries is asked about, I refer to the fuel tax, but I want to ask about the airport tax, because we came in this honorable house and debated the airport tax. And when we went into committee stage, Mr. Speaker, I asked a couple of questions on how this legislation will operate, and a member opposite virtually said to the chair then, the former speaker, that you're not supposed to ask questions in committee stage, so don't ask those questions. And I allowed it to pass. Because there was a serious flaw in the legislation, a serious flaw. And this flaw has been exposed now. Because the legislation says that the money is supposed to be used for airport development. But it says it only goes into a lockbox when a financing agreement has been signed with somebody for the some entity for the financing of the construction. And we ask the question, until then, the money is collected, what is going to happen to it? What is going to happen to it? And I was told, don't ask that question. Don't ask that question. Wait for June. Don't ask that question. Mr. Speaker, we need to know the airport tax. Where is the lockbox for it? It is estimated that $29.3 million will be collected. But there's no provisions in the estimates for it to be transferred to a lockbox account. There is no provision. anywhere in there that says the $29.3 million will be transferred to a lockbox account. And I trust that the member from Miko South will provide sufficient explanation. So lesson one that we have learned so far from revenue, lesson one, that the government is earning less money than it expected. The increases in revenue will largely due to the two new taxes forced on St. Lucians, airport tax and fuel tax. Airport tax. So the increase that a member from Ansel Canaries was boasting about, we're moving in the right direction, the numbers are glorious, were due to two taxes, airport tax and fuel tax. And when we debate the budget, there'll be more on it. Now let's look at expenditure, Mr. Speaker. Please guide me with how much time I have left, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at expenditure. The estimated expenditure for wages and salaries for 2017-2018 was $490 million. $490 million. This year's budget estimates, or this budget estimate we're debating, $501 million will be spent. An increase of 11 million. What was estimated for last year was 480 million. So 480 was estimated. It is projected at 490. Well, 490 was estimated and is expected at 480 will be spent. So there's a difference of $21 million in wages and salaries. None of that increase is for wage and salary increase to public servants. In fact, the Minister of Finance has made it very clear to the police that there will be no wage increase for them. I've never heard such a pronouncement even before negotiations start, but that's another story. So if it's going to increase by more than $21 million, Mr. Speaker, let us examine which departments will spend the $21 million. And I must say to you, it was always a hallmark of previous United Workers' Party governments to talk about containing public sector wage expenditure, always. In fact, there was a manifesto where it was virtually announced that about 1,000 public servants would be sent home to keep it manageable and reduce the level of wages. This is the first time I'm seeing, under the United Workers' Party government, an explosion in spending for wages and salaries, and makes you wonder why and what's the motivation for that. But let's look at the details, Mr. Speaker, because some of it is quite justifiable. The AG Chambers, Mr. Speaker, $600,000 increase in wages and salaries, $600,000. Essentially for more lawyers, as the member is saying, so one would not necessarily argue with that. But sometimes you really wonder whether the Prime Minister is getting the quality of legal advice. And I know the AG is a fine person, so it has to be that the Prime Minister does not listen to the advice that he gets. Home Affairs, Mr. Speaker, on page 121. Home Affairs, $1.3 million more in wages and salaries, mainly for new fire officers. I have no objection to more fire officers being employed. Department of Equity, $800,000 more in the Department of Equity, but for justifiable reasons. More social workers, more carers for the elderly in the senior citizens' homes, more family case workers, and you'll find all of that, Mr. Speaker, on page 321. Again, I would not oppose such an initiative. Health, $526,000 on page 369, largely to finance the National Health Information System. Apparently, previously it was under capital, it's been moved onto recurrent now. But listen, Finance, Department of Finance, $840,000 on new staff to establish 2 new units, National Integrated Planning and Program Unit and National Competitiveness and Productivity Unit. At this time in our country, when civil servants are begging for a salary increase, when we're trying to contain the deficit, $840,000 on new staffing. And Mr. Speaker, you can find it in the estimates. I'm not making it up. Very interesting one, and the member for Miku North is not there. Education, on page 330, education is increasing by $1.35 million. And it's a little bizarre, because it appears from the estimates on page 358 and 359 that the Education Department will be increasing the number of primary and secondary school teachers. And I want the minister, the member for Meku, to explain that to me. When I refer to it, there appears to be an increase in the number of primary school and secondary school teachers at a time when we're told that schools have been closed and we have too many teachers. This must be an abnormality. Must be. It does not make sense. And I look forward to the minister explaining how it is they are increasing the number of primary and secondary school teachers. She's working at the precise moment. It's on page 358 and 359. And then under education, Mr. Speaker, there is a re-establishment of the plant and equipment unit at a cost of 400,000 K. The allocation for school repair is only 1.2 million, but a unit has been established that will cost $400,000. And I ask the question, why not keep it under the Department of Infrastructure? There are already people employed in the Department of Infrastructure overseeing the repair of schools. Do we need at this time to set up a new unit in the Ministry of Education that would cost $400,000? And I ask, why? Under the Department of Economic Development, $542,000 on page 419. I'm not going to go into detail on it because it's almost irrational. The second area of expenditure of interest to us, Mr. Speaker, is the increase in professional and consultancy services. And you can get it on page 8, Roman numeral 8. And the political leader and member for Castries is dealt with it. An increase from $8 million in 2016-2017 to $12 million in this financial year. And projected for the next financial year, $14 million. So it moved from 8 million to 12 million and now 14 million. The Department of Finance alone has an increase of $1.2 million for consultants. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we all know which consultancy firm or consultants have to be paid. So, Mr. Speaker, the second lesson we have learned from this budget, government is not giving a wage and salary increase to public servants and civil servants, but it is adding significantly to the wage bill. And consultancies are going up, up, up. Mr. Speaker, let's look at capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is the heartbeat of any economy. It is the avenue for which government sets the pace for economic development. Capital expenditure is about acquiring assets for economic transformation and establishing equity and securing growth in any economy. Under the St. Lucia Labour Party, capital expenditure in 2015-2016 was $256.8 million. In the budget of 2016-2017, which the SLP left, the estimate for capital expenditure was $325 million. Under the United People's Party that inherited that budget, only $219 was spent. This financial year, the government intends, well, the financial year, the estimate we're debating, the government is estimating to only spend $236 million. And I ask, well, let me just read that again. Under the UWP, which inherited the budget, $219 was spent. So it moved from $256.8 under the Labour Party. The Labour Party left behind $325 million estimates, only $219 was spent. In this financial year that we are in now, the government budgeted to spend $362 million, but only $246 million was spent. And I ask, why was there such a low implementation rate? I ask, why was there such, we will deal with that in the policy debate, Honorable Prime Minister. We will deal with that. Why was there such a low implementation rate? There was economic growth because of Royalton and the project that was started by the Labour Party. But so let's move on. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, last year, the member for Castries Southeast and even Soufre Saltibus was saying, execute, execute, execute. This government is about executing, executing, executing. And I certainly intended to see a very significant implementation rate. But now I know what the execute really meant. Mr. Speaker, this estimates only provide a capital budget of $284.6 million for the financial year. $80 million less than what was provided in the last budget. Now explain to me, why is the government, when they're saying there's so much economic growth, there's so much happening and the numbers are going in the right direction, why are they spending less money in capital expenditure? The public sector investment program is fundamental to securing growth. When you depend on foreign investors coming to build hotels, there can be delays in approval, there can be delays in their financing. But when you have a strong PSIP, that is what guarantees growth and development. But the DSH model of development will be tested, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, under the capital expenditure provided for in this year, guess what goes up the most? Guess what goes up the most, Mr. Speaker? I don't want you to answer me because you'll betray, the narrative so far. Consultancy, feasibility, and tendering is on the increase again. Under capital expenditure, it increased under recurrent, and it's increasing under capital as well. It's moving from $28.1 million to $36.6 million. Consultancies continue to go up, up, up. So between consultancies in recurrent and consultancies in capital, we have almost $15 million.
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes.
15. So we witness in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, decline in capital expenditure and infrastructure, huge decline in agriculture, decline in equity, decline in health, decline in home affairs, and national security. So less money to spend on equipping the police, making sure SSU has uniforms, making sure they have patrol vehicles, because there's a significant cut in capital expenditure. So the third lesson we have learned, Mr. Speaker, is that the government is investing less in the people and the infrastructure of the country. Mr. Speaker, let me do a quick review of 4 critical ministries, 4 critical departments, just to make the point. The Department of Commerce, on page 483. There was the Industrial Development Assistance Program, which was allocated $529,000. It is now zero. It used to be a consultancy. Strengthening the institutional infrastructure for trade competitiveness was allocated $426,000. It is now zero. It was also a consultancy. Enhancing the implementation of investment environment reform agenda was allocated $200,000. It is now zero. It was another consultancy. Enhancing St. Lucia's trading environment and export capabilities was $445,000. That has been completed. The only allocation in the Department of Commerce for capital is a national export development strategy, which is another consultancy, for $900,000. There is no money for local manufacturers, no money for local entrepreneurs, no capital provisions being made. Department, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm certainly anxious to hear the answers, but I'm only speaking to what I see in the estimates. The Department of Tourism, page 493. Village tourism was allocated $2.7 million last year. $2.7 million last year, village tourism, in the estimates. This year, $324,000. It would be most interesting, Mr. Speaker, and when I heard the member for Ancillary Canaries and the Minister of Tourism stood up, I really thought he would explain how the $2.7 million was spent that was provided for in the estimates. And instead, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I hope Marigo and Banan can benefit from the $2.7 million and the $324,000 for the village tourism. Mr. Speaker, the Tourism Authority will receive a decrease in its grant from $10.6 million to $7.6 million, a decrease in its grant. And the minister has to clarify, because in the estimates, it says that government is now paying for seats on airlines, a practice which was stopped. Page 274 is very clear. it says that the government of St. Lucia is supporting British Airways, Virgin, and all flights from Canada. So we are going back to a practice of using taxpayers' money, and I'm not saying it's not entirely necessary sometimes, but it was not necessary 2 years ago, to pay in airlines to fly to St. Lucia. Airlines, and again, you go to page 274 and read it for yourself, Mr. Speaker. The member for Mikusov is shaking his head. It's in the estimates, page 274. You want to call it? Okay, we'll call them. We're in the chamber. You want to call United Airlines? Go ahead and call. Just stop my clock whilst I wait on the Prime Minister to call
Honourable
United
member,
Airlines.
continue.
Oh, you want me to continue? We'll answer all of that in the policy debate, Mr. Speaker. So we need to know how many millions of dollars have been paid. And I ask, where are the monies for product development? Where are the monies for product development? To help out persons like Gloria in Marigot. When the minister speaks of hundreds of thousands of cruise ship arrivals and how the country is booming from cruise ship arrivals, I want him to go Marigot and ask Gloria at the lookout, how has she benefited from the hundreds of thousands of cruise ship arrivals that have come to St. Lucia? I want him to tell us where the money is for training. So you see the boys on the Marigot Beach, Edwin and Eugene and all of them, go and ask them how they've benefited from the $2.7 million that was allocated last year. Where are the monies for sensitizing St. Lucians on the importance of tourism, so that tourism is seen as ours, and it's not we and them, but that's a product, a service that we are selling. The Department of Education, I tell you, there was a program, Mr. Speaker, page 501, for the Division of Innovation, and I supported this because when I read the key program strategies, I thought this was one of the most excellent inclusions in the budget, Mr. Speaker. And I ask any one of you to go and read the key program strategies for the Division of Innovation. But I noted in this financial year, $521,000 was allocated for a community access program. It is now zero. And I need the minister to explain why is it zero and what was done with the $521,000 that was allocated for the community access program. And I say to the minister, there's one thing she should fight for. In addition to all the things she should fight for, is the work program of the Division of Innovation, because it can mean a difference. There's an allocation of $2 million under Equip, but only $1.2 million for building and infrastructure. Is this for school repair? If not, where is the money to be spent on schools? Could we not get more money spent on the repair of schools? I know the comment was made by the Prime Minister that we should not repair the schools until we change the curriculum. But I think, this is a rather inverse way of thinking, Mr. Speaker. So we really need to repair the schools in St. Lucia. Where is the money to spend on furniture for schools? Where is the money for ICT teacher training? Where is the money for purchase of IT equipment? Where is the money for renovating and equipping schools for the school feeding program? Mr. Speaker, when we speak of the numbers being so glorious and so much growth, Mr. Speaker, there are those missing elements in this budget. I was pleased, Mr. Speaker, to see, again under the Department of Education, there was an allocation of $500,000 for a Caribbean youth empowerment program. And I supported it. Once it's young people, I will support it. There's now zero. What has become of that program? How was the money spent? $500,000 for a Caribbean youth empowerment program, and it disappears. It has disappeared like all the programs in youth and sports, all the programs in infrastructure, and many others. The Department of Health, Mr. Speaker, the department is in crisis because of poor leadership. The sector is in a state of uncertainty, and these days the minister is Mumu, is a member of our Castries Southeast that speaks on health, not even the minister. But a lot more will be said. A lot more will be said later. Mr. Speaker, I note a decline in allocation for the new National Hospital, and of course there are further delays in its commissioning. And the member of Castries East has called for a very clear plan as to how the new National Hospital and the health sector will be addressed. And I guess we'll see more of that when we have the policy debates. But it's interesting that the member for Answer County will say we should not politicize health. But I remember when a committee was set up by the honorable member for Beaufort South for the financing of health in this country, and as the member for Castries North to chair it, he was prohibited from chairing such a committee. And now we've been told don't politicize health. When one of the most learned health administrators and most visionary persons involved in health, as St. Lucia and Dr. Stephen King, was unceremoniously removed as being in charge of the transition to the new hospital, the OKEO, a hospital that bears his father's name. And we say don't politicize, but more on that later. You know, when the government was in opposition, the Prime Minister threatened to go on march.
You have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, to go on march if the hospital is not open immediately. And I want to say to the member for Castries East that the time has come for us to go on march for the opening of the OKEO hospital. So, under health, there is no money for repairs to health centers. There is no money for dental services. There is no money for ambulances. And I wonder, Mr. Speaker, where in the allocation is it provided for to pay for the privatization of the management of the hospital? Mr. Speaker, the member of Castries East has looked at the various headings from current surplus, recurrent balance, and he's looked at all the indicators, Mr. Speaker. And on every single one of them, this government is doing worse. And I sat here, Mr. Speaker, and I listened to the member from Ancillary Canaries. And at some point, Mr. Speaker, you have to correct members who blatantly mislead the House, because the figures are very clear, that in every single one of the indicators, it has gotten worse in this country. And for members to deliberately cite wrong figures or distort the figures is not entirely what is expected of honorable persons, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on borrowing, I want to repeat a point made by the political league and the member for Castries East. And it's a very important point. Very important point. And he quoted the Social and Economic Review. And I want to read it out, Mr. Speaker. Read it to you, Mr. Speaker. Page 60, Mr. Speaker. Dealing with the debt of this country. And the Social and Economic Review says, total other central government liabilities, which include commercial bank overdrafts, outstanding domestic payables, and ECCB advances, stood at 88.8 million at the end of 2017, compared to 22.9 million in December 2016. You know what that says, Mr. Speaker? That all the calculations of debt, there is $88 million that this government owes that is not calculated in that. And it has increased last year by $60-something million. And the member of Castries was saying, if you add that $60 million to the debt stock of the country, liabilities that the government must pay, it will change the configuration of what our debt to GDP ratio is. And Mr. Speaker, again, the Minister of Finance was speaking about how the percentages have gotten better than they expected. Tell the people of St. Lucia about rebasing. Tell the people, nowhere did the minister explain to the people of St. Lucia that a rebasing of the economy has taken place. And Mr. Speaker, in a very quick way, rebasing is a simple concept. If you used to, please listen to what I've just said. If you used to measure the size of the economy using certain services, and now it's been reviewed and more services are added, it means the value of the economy will get bigger. And if your GDP is bigger and your debt is more or less the same marginal points, the percentages can actually improve and make it appear that you have more space for borrowing. So when you're boasting of where it was then and where you've taken it, tell the people of St. Lucia because of rebasing, it has given you more latitude to borrow. It doesn't mean that we have borrowed less money or we owe less money. It doesn't mean that. In the last, this government said that it would not borrow. I don't understand. Said that it would not borrow. Then it said it will only borrow if there's a revenue stream to support it. If there is a revenue stream to support it, Mr. Speaker, this government has borrowed $41 million.
Should be summing up, sir.
Yes, I have. This government borrowed $241 million, and not a cent of it was supported by a revenue stream. Not a cent. And this year, the government plans to borrow $300 million more with no revenue stream supporting it. And Mr. Speaker, at some point we will debate the borrowing of $150 million US for roads and borrowing another $150 million US for the airport. But that's another story for another day. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the management of this economy continues to fail us. The semblance of progress and growth and everything is okay. I heard an honorable member say, you know, we don't even have as many poor people in St. Lucia anymore. I'm not sure which reality they live in. Things are getting worse in this country. And Mr. Speaker, on that basis, I cannot support the estimates as presented. Thank you very much.